Hello, this is Branko Malic of Kali Tribune. Now, at first sight, you may feel, if you are following Kali Tribune, that you'll have just more of the same, because this picture tends to pop up every now and then in our videos or in our articles. But no, we will reiterate one insight that we believe we had developed some times ago, and it is now time to update it a bit. Now, as for political situation, we tend to cover every now and then on Kali Tribune. That is to say, the situation that we sum up under the umbrella term of sustainable development, thus following not only European Union blanket policy, but also UN blanket policy for the world in general. There are some things that have to be always clarified, because the reactions on against sustainable development tend to go into right-wing direction in various different brands of political projects that should counter it without ever naming this policy as a true enemy. The most popular term for what we would call globalism, what we will call a policy that wants to bring this about, and we'll talk about what this means, this image, because this image explains a lot. The tendency is to call this resistance to the left, that there is some kind of left-wing conspiracy or left-wing policy that tries to bring this about. I think that this is very imprecise, that this is not doing justice to an actually developed and programmatic politics that is poised to bring about a certain fundamental change in the human self-understanding and global politics. And this program has a name. Its name is Sustainable Development. It is given a name. And I find it very noteworthy that this is rarely, if ever, mentioned, especially among the popular, let's call them analysts or critics of this policy, working either independently, as we in Kali Tribune do, or independently, that is on the margins and from the margins, which is not a badge of honor, or in an organized sense of political parties of the right or conservative intellectuals and so on. And I think they tend to, by not clearly defining terms of engagement, eventually fail to address the real problem. That is to say, they miss on the details, and we all know who dwells in the details. Now, this image comes from the promotion of a certain document we wrote about on Kali Tribune a long time ago, that is on 28th of March of 2015, in an article called Oppressive Tolerance. This document is called the Model European Statute for the Promotion of Tolerance. It was brought about by the European Council on Tolerance and Reconciliation. Here we have the website of the said NGO, let's call it, a think tank. These are some of the members. This is Moshe Kantor, Tony Blair, this is Milan Kučan of Slovenia, and so on. And this document has been revised. Now we on Kali Tribune in a hyperlink have the original document, because this analysis was written about original document. The new document is something very different. it is something that is almost acceptable to sane person, while the original document was an epitome of insanity of the people who promote this policy we call sustainable development. And I will not, excuse me, this is one of the classic early Kali Tribune punchlines, not very polite and not very subtle, but it kind of cuts the chase. It resolves some complicated issue as Alexander's sword resolved Gordian knot. And because sometimes the going into details of the debate with people who cook up documents like this is very counterproductive, because to go to debate insanity with insane people is a sure way to become insane yourself. Anyways, in the promotion of this document, we had these lovely images. There are two of them I have here, and you see these images. These images portray the people of the future Europe, because this tolerance promotion, quote unquote, document was targeting European nation states, not Europe as not EU, but precisely nation states. The idea was that it be promulgated among the governments, so to speak, to get it in the respective governments' legislations, as of course non-binding thing, but kind of like constitution of reforming those governments and those societies in order that people of these societies start to look like this. And how do these people look? They are freaks. This is one has to be aware that there is no irony in this, that there is no joke here. This is how people who advocate for documents such as this and for politics and sustainable development see human beings. The tolerance in this sense, in this pictorial sense, would mean schizophrenia in a sense. It would mean breaking up the individuality, and one individuality, that is to say uniqueness of a given person, race, gender, or ethnicity was broken. Those broken pieces are to be reassembled at will. By whom? That would be a good question, because I don't think those people, those individuals, will be allowed to themselves do something like that. So we have, for instance, one part of the face is an Asian woman. The bottom part is, I think, this is Caucasian or Semitic or Middle Eastern man with a 3-day or 4-day or a week beard. And this is, for instance, how would one of those citizens be? He would be the mutant between Asian woman and, let's say, Caucasian male. That would be one person. Of course, in the real world, you can be either Asian woman or Caucasian male. You cannot be both. You can be of mixed descent, but then again, your ethnic, racial, and whatever features would be melded in a natural way, not in this way. And this is very important to point out, because this is something very much resembling alchemical experiment, because whereas the right is always bitching about the race mixing. What you have here is more like splicing or let's say engineering, because as much as these right-wing biologically based political theories are against race mixing, they have to admit that when race is mixed, this is something that can be done naturally. There is no biological impediment of doing it. Whereas somebody who used this illustration, who concocted this illustration and use it as a promo for a document that says what this says in pictures says in writing, did not really believe this. Did not believe in a natural, for instance, natural intermixing of peoples, cultures, races, and so on. He believed, as it seems to me from this, in the artificial act of doing this, of a recreation of people, and recreation that renders people at the first sight but ugly. The main impression one is struck with while looking at these pictures, let's say this one, is asymmetry. You see how this is framed. This is the angular cut, so that this mutant can have one blue eye, one brown eye, and the lower face of somebody else, middle face of still somebody else, and the upper part of face of head of third person. So you have a collage. You have the you have the very ineptly conjoined parts of the human faces, and face is the natural correlate of person, because the very word persona, it comes from the word to a word that was to designate the face, but was more used in ancient times to designate the mask, persona, in a Latin world. The mask used in dramatic in theater. So what we have here is more of the same, and this is a kind of test for people who are looking at something like this. Do they see some problem? I was astonished that I met people who see nothing ugly in this. That this is not ugly. For instance, look at this. For Christ's sakes. There are people who think this is, in fact, beautiful. I think that this delineates this dividing line between normalcy and insanity. Because if you see something like this, that is artificially, and this means violently, cutting up individual unique features and then mixing them in a completely asymmetrical way, and you don't see this as ugly, then I think you are a bit already overboard. And any discussion with somebody who doesn't see this as it is, as monstrosity in fact, is obsolete. Now, when we put this in the context of what we have now with this immigration crisis, with an attempt to make a migration a blanket term for any kind of relocation, that is to say, to erase differences between not only legality or illegality of migration, but also between countries of origins, ethnicities of origin, of erasing anything that could fix you in stable position, that is your ancestry, your home. This is very ominous then, because it is my opinion, from what I gather partly from living in this time of ours, age of ours, and partly from reading documents such as this, observing images such as this. I think this is the purpose, the final purpose of it all. This purpose doesn't have to be necessarily some kind of conspiratorial master plan. It is simply an inclination of people who devise such policies. And no amount of fluffy terms as tolerance, as love towards fellow men, that is supposed to render all immigration legal, can hide the fact what it is all about. It is about creating monsters, and nobody is privileged in this game, because I think those who think that, and this goes especially to this right-wing interpretation of the current global politics, if, let's say, to an extent the global politics exists. The main error is to think that groups who are theoretically privileged in this, what they call leftist, I would rather say sustainable development mindset, that they are in some kind of some sense favored against whites and so on. I don't think this is the case at all. I think they are more like used to undermine the social groups that are, for instance, in Europe, the strongest, that are indigenous. And the reason is to destroy any indigenous rootedness. If the situation were in some imaginary world, possible world, the opposite, they would probably be completely consequent and honest and would be bashing yellow man or black man or whatever color man, not the white man. I really believe it would be so. And so I don't think it really is about some kind of white genocide. I think it's about human genocide, and I think that this kind of like gives it a very good illustration, pictorial illustration, because on these images nobody is what he is. Nobody is he, nobody is she, nobody is white, nobody is black, nobody is yellow, nobody is this, nobody is woman or man. Everybody is everything, and everybody is nothing. And I think this is the trajectory where it goes. And what is very interesting is how insane it is, and how simple it is, that you have a huge problem of accepting the fact that somebody with tangible power in hand in this world really wants to see something like this go down. I think in this system theory of system, let's say, system building politics as sustainable development, everybody is a loser if he is a human, because this is the politics that looks at humans, observes humans as clusters of resources, and wants to manage them in conjunction with subsystems of nature and economy. And those subsystems have to be equalized, that there is no hierarchy of what is more important. The reason why there is a very strong impression of hatred towards humans, because it's always in these ecological circles that are inspired by this idea, more or less all of them are, maybe inadvertently, is the idea humans destroy planet, blah 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 blah. This is simply because, in my opinion, we still have this consciousness of the inner superiority of human being to everything else in this created world of ours. So superiority of human being, one human person towards the whole forest of trees, and this superiority indeed exists. And if you want to have a system where you look at the human beings in general as subsystem to be equalized with other systems, you have to bring them down to the level of animals, or the level of plants, or the level of resources in the end. And I think this is plainly what's going on. And this is why you have these calls for this absolute tolerance, where any host nation, host ethnic community, host whatever, has to work to the detriment of itself to equalize with newcomers. The whole reason is to make them obsolete as unique groups. And furthermore, and this is the holy grail, unique persons. Because, for instance, in this article we wrote about it, how this statute for the promotion of tolerance undermines the concept of person, because it defines dignity from difference. The group is defined by its difference towards the other groups, not fundamentally by what it is, but what it is not. That is true negativity. And this difference is the only thing that is promoted. This is the main thing. So you constantly promote negation. You don't affirm. You don't affirm a group. You negate it, or negate the other group relationship towards it. It's a little naughty, I know. Not in the sense, not naughty, but not. It's hard to understand. It's better explained in writing, and you can read this article. I think it still has its value. It is a bit old, but I think we got this point. Just a second. There is this idea. They tell it at one instant. Okay, we won't go into quoting. I would have to find it. The purpose is that groups are defined by differences. But you can't define something by difference. You have to define it by identity. You have to go from the affirmation, because if you go from negation, negations will follow in the end. Negation gives birth only to negation. And it is, for instance, this image would be an epitome of negation. An epitome of negation through which you can figure out everything else. This is some kind of negative ontology when you interpret things like this, because in normal ontology, that is to say, the methodic way of understanding some general aspects of being, when you do that, you take the best example as a paradigm. You take some perfection, and through this perfection, you analyze imperfections, because it is the benchmark, it is a measure. Whereas here, you take as a paradigm the complete destruction. This is destruction of the notion of identity. This is schizophrenic identity, and identity that is shattered. So you have this, and through this work of negative ontology of human being that breaks any kind of identity of human being, that is from sexual, biological, you name it, you can look everything through it, and consequentially you'll see everything shattered. This is very much and strictly logically satanic. Logically satanic, I don't mean hoofs and horns. This is when you invert the ordo essendi and ordo cognoscendi, is the order of being and order of understanding. When you invert them to get to inverted consequences. So this shemale Euroasian, Asio-European will never be either of these two. Neither woman, neither man, nothing. It cannot. This being cannot reach its uniqueness, its virtuality, as was in Middle Ages. Virtuality was the idea of perfections, exemplary perfection of a thing. That is something that thing does not possess in itself actually, but potentially, ultimately, let's say, maybe in the God's mind, or in this perfect sense. And this is something that is rendered impossible in the society that would become like this. And I think that one could agree with me that European and Western societies are very much advanced into this direction, unfortunately. This is not science fiction, this is not dystopia anymore, and moreover, masses of people abroad who would see this as very, let's say, even beautiful image, as something that is praiseworthy, something we should strive about. So with this thought, we'll conclude. This was to reiterate Kali Tribune interpretation of what we called some strains of this globalist policy, just to make things clear, to not stray in some unnuanced directions that don't pay enough attention to details. Thank you for your attention. This is Branko Malic of Kali Tribune signing out.